Do you have solar panels and complain that when you pump energy into the system, you're paid too little? Maybe then energy communities are for you. Let's see in this video why some people want energy communities and if maybe you're one of them. Those of you who have solar panels know, at noon, when the panels produce energy and you pump it into the grid, you get paid about 25 bani per kilowatt. In the evening, when panels stop working, you must use grid energy for lighting. And for the rest, you pay 4 times more, about 1 lu per kolas. Many of you are upset, you feel cheated, and maybe you blame the energy distributor, the government, the European Union, or whoever else. But first, we should understand why it is like this. And the reality is that the energy distributor has to instantly give the energy you pump in to another consumer, often in other countries and thousands of kilometers away, and that costs money. Why? Because there are few energy storage systems, and for the purpose of this video, we can ignore them. And energy flows from the producer to the consumer at the speed of light. I know that from Richard Feynman. That's why there's no time to hesitate. The energy must be distributed immediately to a consumer. Look, let's say you're in Spain, a champion in photovoltaic energy. Well, there's also a lot of sun there. At noon, the panels produce energy, but people are away from home. The energy goes into the system, you're a consumer. The distributor must offload this energy, either to an energy-intensive factory or somewhere in Turkey, where evening comes and people start turning on the lights. Long transmission networks are used, additional fees are paid if you cross the border, and so on. There are costs. In the evening, when Spaniards use energy, it will no longer come from panels, but from a producer who generated it instantly, just a few milliseconds before. Do you remember that energy travels at the speed of light? As a distributor, you need to identify the producer, who may be found at France's nuclear power plants. Different price, country, and taxes. In the end, the distributor can't receive and give you back energy at the same price, because they have expenses with distributing the energy, which they have to do continuously. You as a prosumer still aren't happy. It seems to you that they're giving you too little. Let's say you're talking to a neighbor who's chopping wood at noon. Gheorghe, you tell him, I'll give you this energy, we'll work something out. At a price. Of course, you'll get a better price. But to send the energy to him, you have to use the local grid. That means you send the energy through it. That's unless you run your own cables, but that's not what we're talking about here. Since energy flows through the distributor's cables, the exchange will be reflected on the meters. The distributor, he sees and says, Gheorghe, you took this much energy. It costs you at the market price, and I see that you took energy from a neighbor. You no longer pay for it since I cover it at the prosumer rate, which is about 4 times cheaper. Simply put, neither you nor Gheorghe did anything. So does it still seem unfair to you? This time you didn't send the energy to Turkey. The energy went from you to your neighbor, and the grid wasn't used over long distances. Why should the distribution grid take money? The energy was used locally. It didn't leave from there. If you think that way, you're not alone. Thousands in Western Europe have faced the same problem. Local groups of energy producers and consumers who just wanted to distribute their energy locally among themselves through the distribution grid with better prices because the energy wasn't being redistributed over long distances. In response to their remarks, the European Union authorities reacted and created European legislation to make this possible. Why did they do it? Because, surprisingly, it can even help distribution networks on a large scale. How? I'm sure you want to know. Here's how. You've probably seen it on the news. This summer, a large part of Spain suffered a major power outage that lasted for several hours, leaving entire provinces without electricity. The main cause wasn't a lack of energy, but rather the instability of the grid due to large fluctuations in production. During the day in Spain, photovoltaic panels generate tens of gigawatts, and this energy must be constantly balanced according to consumption. On that day, the large proportion of solar energy, combined with the lack of traditional systems that provide electrical inertia, led to a more fragile grid that was more sensitive to fluctuations. When a small disturbance occurred, the grid couldn't compensate quickly and failed. This situation shows how important modern regulation and storage mechanisms are so that energy flows evenly and the grid remains stable. even when production from renewable sources fluctuates greatly. Conclusion: the energy distribution system needs regulation and storage mechanisms, but it also needs to be optimized in such a way as to avoid large energy exchanges. But is this exactly what the model proposed by the European Union does? It encourages local energy distribution so that we avoid large energy exchanges between distant parts of the system. And the method is very ingenious because it comes down to optimizing an economic cost. Thus, the European Union essentially says this: any group of prosumers and consumers can create an energy community. Each consumer or prosumer has his electricity meter is reinstalled like this. They don't install cables between themselves, they use the distributor's existing network. At any time, however, this community is treated by the electricity grid as a regular consumer-prosumer. Basically, the payment and final metering are not done individually, but for the entire community. These are essentially the rules of the game, and from here comes what the European Union wants: an efficient distribution of energy at the local level. Why? Because if a local community optimizes the local exchange of energy, it will pay less to the energy distributor. As we will see, it's good to say once again, communities are virtual, meaning that no one is pulling additional transmission wires. People don't have to be neighbors, they can also be a few streets apart. In fact, stores can also join the same community. Physically, nothing changes. The meters stay where they are, the panels stay where they are, and so on. The only thing that changes is the accounting. Instead of recording each consumer or prosumer individually, the distribution company sums up the meters of the community members at every moment and sends only a single bill. In this system, for example, my neighbor Georgika and I could form a community. Now I can pump energy into the grid at noon. The meter records it for me. At the same time though, Georgika is consuming this energy, and that's what his meter records. It's a community. So the distributor adds it up and it's zero at every moment. One gives, the other takes energy right away, so there's nothing to pay. It's much better than the initial situation where I was uploading energy. I was paid a quarter of the market price, while Georgika used it and paid the distributor full market price. Each consumer or prosumer reinstalled their own electricity meter. Each consumer, the cable. Among them, they used the existing distributor's network. At any moment, however, this community is treated by the electricity network as a regular consumer-prosumer. Basically, the payment and final metering are not done individually, but for the entire community. Here's the trick. It's meant to benefit the community. I have to produce energy at the same time when Georgika is using it, so that the sum of the two meters, one positive and one negative, is zero at any given moment. The conclusion is that if we minimize costs, we'll end up with a balanced local network, which is also good for the distributor. This is one of the main arguments of the European Union. Linev says, well then, why don't you and Georgika start a local community? If you're not pulling wires, changing meters, and it's all just accounting. Why? Because there are also additional costs, such as setup costs, licenses, authorizations, feasibility studies, as well as operating, maintenance, and accounting costs. At the beginning, for example, the founding document must clearly state how the expenses and profits are divided among the members of the community. During operation, someone, probably an accountant, needs to analyze the meters and distribute the costs or profits according to the agreement. That is no longer the distributor's job. The distributor looks at the energy community as a single client, as a whole. In addition, members can be added along the way, so the agreements can change. And there's one more important thing. What's the point of doing it if Georgika and I won't synchronize? Then the production and consumption of energy, so that we use as much locally produced energy as possible and reduce dependence on the grid during peak hours. That's the whole idea of the mechanism. To minimize costs, an energy community will end up self-synchronizing what it produces and consumes, in such a way that the exchange of energy with the outside is zero at any moment. Of course, zero is not possible in practice, but costs are minimized. Who could form energy communities in practice so costs drop through these self-correction mechanisms? A group of residents of an apartment building, for example, who share the photovoltaic panels on the building and where there are households that consume energy at noon. In all cases, investment amortization must also be considered. A recent study in Spain highlights that the more members there are in the community, the better it is. In practice, around 100 members, that was ideal. On the other hand, the existence of a battery group is not necessarily required, the study says, as we might expect. This is also due to the higher initial cost of the interior. The study says that the essential role is played by the diversity of consumers in the community. The more varied the activities of the members are. At the extreme, some use energy during the day, others at night. Some have heat pumps, others have electric cars. The more balanced the internal energy flow becomes. In other words, communities work well when production and consumption complement each other. In the end, energy circulates locally between people, buildings, and businesses. The European Union calls this a prosumer-centric model. The grid becomes an exchange platform instead of just an energy pipeline. The study also highlights challenges for those aiming to build such energy communities. In addition to administrative and organizational costs, communities need to have a clear governance system. It must be established from the beginning who manages the data, who does the calculations, and who decides how the benefits are distributed. That's why in Spain, specialized companies have even emerged that offer management services for such communities. The final result is that members of an energy community can save between 20% and 40% on their monthly bill, depending on how well their consumption is synchronized. But in Romania, here, energy community legislation is just starting, but the European framework also requires Romanian authorities to implement it. That's why pilot projects are emerging in Romania's villages, localities, apartment neighborhoods, and agricultural cooperatives. Energy communities will be able to start with a minimum of 5 participants who will be able to share energy and storage resources together within that common city, or more precisely, an administrative territorial unit. The settlement and billing part will be done either internally or through an external provider, the goal being to greatly simplify the process. The surplus or supplementation of energy will be done at the market price during their respective time intervals. What do you think? Interested in these energy communities? Let me know in the comments if you want more info, and we might make another video. Honestly, I wish this had been more technical when I began working on it. However, along the way, I realized that the idea behind energy communities is essentially economic. The structure is such that any energy community will end up optimizing local energy exchange in such a way as to minimize interaction with the grid and ultimately to pay less. That's the end of today's video. As usual, if you haven't subscribed yet, you can do so by pressing this subscribe button. You can also find me on Patreon, where higher tier subscribers get answers directly via WhatsApp,